first of all, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm not intimidated by that. I think the law is there to serve people, to serve society, and so society has got every right to have a very strong opinion about what the law should or shouldn't say. And I think for too long, certainly in property, those with a beneficial interest in property, and I'm talking historically, and lawyers have had too much of an influence in how our property law has evolved. Because land law is, land is about more than just land law. This is a statement by George Osborne in 2006, the current Chancellor. He went to Ireland. He said, a generation ago, the very idea that a British politician would go to Ireland to see how to run an economy would have been laughable. The Irish Republic was seen as Britain's poor and troubled country cousin, a rural backwater on the edge of Europe. Today, things are different. Ireland stands as a shining example of the art of the possible in long-term economic policy making, and that's why I'm here in Dublin, to listen and to learn. Now, the problem, of course, as we all know, in Ireland, it had a massive collapse, which is all to do with an inflated land market. This is the headquarters of the Anglo-Irish Bank, standing there incomplete. And this is what a writer in the Financial Times thought. He said, at the height of the lunacy, around 3/4 of the total lending by Irish banks, or about 2.5 times the size of the Irish economy, bound up in property construction and land speculation of one sort of Northern Rock on steroids. So this is land policy. This is the broader picture within which land law sits. It also sits within a policy of land and how much they get. This is a chap called Mr. Stephen Strutt-D. He owns 39 farms across the north of Scotland. Over the last 10 years, he's made £3 million in land sales. And over the last 10 years, he's received £3.5 million in public subsidies, and this is in with his Bentley GT convertible. And the rest of us, of course, you have one house if you're lucky, and if you're in benefits now, you get a £400 rent cap, and you also get a benefits cap from April this year of £26,000 on any single family, and of course you'd be lucky to have a car. So we've got very, very big differences within society on what it is legitimate for one person to get in public subsidies, £3.5 million over 10 years, so that's £350,000 a year, and what it is for others in society. It's also about whether people can legitimately find a roof over their heads. This is the Herald in November 2010. Edinburgh house prices reach new record level. Then it goes on to say, moving in the right direction. Well, who says that prices going up is things going in the right direction? At the moment, the price of oil, the price of food, the price of many resources is going up, and everyone thinks it's a bad idea. So why is it a really good idea when house prices go up? It's also about things like the law of succession and inheritance. Who's entitled to inherit property and who's not entitled to inherit property? At the moment in Scotland, still, children have no legal right to inherit heritable property. That's a very, very different situation from countries in the continent of Europe, France, for example. It's also fundamentally about sovereignty and questions of territory and statehood, as here in Palestine, where you've got in the foreground here, you have a village that was bulldozed by the Israeli army in 1948 during their ethnic cleansing, and over at the back there you have an Israeli settlement on Palestinian land. So land is very, very political. And Tom Johnson was Secretary of State for Scotland during the war. He wrote a book called Our Scots Noble Families, and in it he wrote, in 1906, I think he wrote it, show the people our old nobility is not noble, that its lands are stolen lands, stolen either by force or fraud. Show the people that their title deeds are rapine, murder, massacre, cheating or court harlotry. Dissolve the halo of divinity that surrounds the hereditary title. Let the people clearly understand that our present House of Lords is composed largely of descendants of successful pirates and rogues. Do these things and you shatter the romance that keeps the nation numb and spellbound while privilege picks its pocket. Politicians they were far better at public speaking and writing then than they are now. This is powerful stuff. And land is also not just about kind of rural stuff and crofters and people in the far northwest and all the rest of it. Robert mentioned the Long Leases Bill. I've been doing a little bit of work on that with relation to common good. And land that belongs to the common good that is on leases of more than 175 years and might be lost. And one of them is the Waverley Market in Edinburgh. And this was a popular market for cattle shows and car shows. And Billy Connolly launched the Great Northern Willie Boot Show there. And it was demolished in 1980, and it was turned into the splendid shopping centre that it is today on a long lease of then 125 years, then extended to 206 years to one of David Murray's company. This is a Queen opening it. And the question here is, well, the question here actually is this common good? I'm having a bit of an argument with the council over this. They said in committee the other week that they had done intensive investigations, intensive studies, they said, into this question. So when it was put to them in committee, that some of the papers I'd come up with in the 1980s, which were papers from the Policy and Resources Committee, from the Director of Administration and Finance and all the rest of it, had said another thing. They were asked whether they'd seen these papers, and they said they hadn't. There's a little funny story about that, which I might tell you later. But the point is that land is contentious, and different people have different views about it, and how it's used is in many cases predicated on how it's owned and who owns it. So I just want to run through, first of all, a little potted history of what I call the kind of 5, or is it 6, I can't remember, great land grabs. 6. Now, a lot of my friends don't like my book. I have written a book, by the way, but they don't like this chapter. Particularly some of my nationalist friends don't like the idea that Robert the Bruce was a murdering medieval warlord. But I just kind of put this in to emphasise the fact that in the medieval period, of course, people like Bruce were fighting, not for any greater notion of independence for Scotland or anything like that. They were fighting because they were part of the elite. And they fought for power, because they wanted power, because power gave you all sorts of things. And in this particular instance, if you won the Crown of Scotland, you basically won Scotland. You owned Scotland. Scotland was owned by the Crown. And you could then use the feudal system as a system of patronage to reward your followers and all the rest of it. Funnily enough, I was in Normandy this summer cycling, and I sat down at a cafe and looked up, and here we are, Place Robert Bruce. Would you like to see the audience? This is Brix in Normandy, where Robert the Bruce, in fact, came from. This is a little aside. So it means by the early 15th century, Scotland was really already parcelled up into parishes, baronies, earldoms, and lordships at a very, very early stage in Scotland's history. The second great land grab was the Reformation and the lands of the Old Kirk. Now, the Reformation came late to Scotland, 1560, in comparison to the rest of Europe. And what had been happening was that the nobility had been getting their the church, and this is the Crossragool Abbey in Ayrshire. Now, in 1550, the Kirk owned 25 of the 26 parishes in Ayrshire. The Kirk was immensely wealthy. The Kirk had an annual income in 1560 at the time of the Reformation of 375,000 Scots pounds. It's a lot, but 1560 that was a fortune. The income of the Crown from its landed interest at the time was 17,000. So the Crown had 17,000, the Church had 375,000. Shows you how rich they were. They had a lot of land. So the nobility managed through a process of about 40 years from about 1520 to get their children, usually their second son, into the position as commendators in these abbeys. And these were the kind of chief executives, the people who looked after the books. And they managed to appropriate a lot of this property to themselves. Now, when the Reformation came along, of course, the Reformation was supported by the Protestant nobility in Scotland, not because of religious reasons, but because they'd already grabbed large acreages of the church's property and were very keen to back what they regarded as a political movement of reform that would abolish the Old Kirk forever and leave them safe with their possessions, which is what they did. The third land grab I kind of characterise as what happened in the 17th century, because that's when the lawyers came in and they tidied everything up. So, for example, we have the Registration Act of 1617, which I won't bother you with, but that established the Register of Saisons. And there's quite a bit of speculation as to why that act was passed then, but certainly one of the reasons it was passed was that there was a tremendous amount of confusion about who owned the church's lands. When a new king came along, in their minority, they weren't allowed to alienate any land, but other people might on their behalf, etc. And there was a lot of confusion about who owned what, so they set up this Register of Saisons. Another point of view, of course, was that a lot of nobility were sitting on land of which they had very dubious titles over, because they'd basically stolen it. So they were very keen to see a system which would enable them to record their titles in a public register and be sure then, have a degree of certainty, as you're mentioning, that this land in fact was theirs. And so they not only passed the Registration Act in 1617, but at the same sitting of Parliament they passed the Act of Prescription, which Robert's just referred to. And that basically allowed for the fact that you recorded a deed in the Register of Saisons, and you possessed it for 40 years, and then it was yours beyond any dispute and beyond any argument.